It was the last U.S. Transcontinental Railroad completed. Some say it should have been the first. The San Diego and Arizona Railway, stretching from southernmost California into northern Mexico and on to Yuma, Arizona and points east. It became a test of skill for its builders. For standing in the way was some of the harshest terrain in the West. Deserts with extremes of weather, treacherous mountain passes, steep rocky canyons that pushed men and machines to their limit. What began as a simple rail link east grew into an ordeal that challenged a city's dignity, a region's destiny, and one man's determination to succeed where all others had failed. This is the story of the Impossible Railroad. As early as the 1850s, savvy Easterners knew all about California. The mild climate, the potential for agriculture and development, the beautiful Pacific coast. It was getting here that was the problem. Railroads had reached the Mississippi River, and plans were drawn to unite the continent with a railroad through to California.
Everyone in the South thought that the Railroad 9 would naturally be built along the 32nd parallel, and San Diego would be the logical destination for such a railroad.
San Diego was a sleepy desert pueblo of less than 1,000 people, but it boasted a natural harbor favorable for shipping and trade. Northern interests favored a plan which led to more lucrative destinations, the gold fields near Sacramento and the bay at San Francisco. The Civil War ended the debate. Politicians and developers agreed that in order to ensure peace and prosperity on the line, the rail highway must be routed north. By 1869, the first Transcontinental Railroad was completed, linking Omaha, Nebraska to Sacramento, California.
Several things defined a city. One thing that defined it was the railroad, both in reality and that if a railroad bypassed you, your town probably died, but even symbolically, you were a city if you had a railroad and if you had a railroad station.
Everyone, I think, fully expected that San Diego would be the other large city because San Diego had a harbor par excellence. Had it not been for the mountain barrier, I think that might well have happened here in San Diego.
Colonel Thomas A. Scott, a rail baron from Philadelphia, convinced Congress to revive plans for the southern route in 1871. They would call it the Texas and Pacific Railway. The excitement drew the attention of the owners of the Central Pacific Railway, newly renamed the Southern Pacific, which completed the northern route a year before. They dismissed the notion of a railroad to San Diego. Banker Charles Crocker stated bluntly,
"You will never live long enough to see a railroad laid to the Bay of San Diego. I have my foot on the neck of San Diego, and I'm going to keep it there."
Thomas Scott's plans fell through, not because of threats, but because of money. A panic on Wall Street caused investors to back out. San Diego's dreams of a railroad were dashed. Hope was rekindled in 1875 when the Southern Pacific completed a 400-mile stretch of line from San Francisco to Los Angeles. City fathers hoped SP might continue building through to San Diego. Instead, the line turned east toward Fort Yuma, Arizona. San Diegan Theodore Van Dyke, engineer, farmer, lawyer, and in later years a writer, recounted the boom and bust cycle created by railroad rumors.
The real estate offices are deserted. The hotels have more waiters than guests, empty stores and houses numerous on all sides. Day after day, year after year, the sun shines down upon quiet streets and storekeepers staring at the door of our almost unbroken vacancy.
San Diegans refused to give up. A third attempt was made by local landowners Frank and Warren Kimball. They offered the Santa Fe Railroad a right-of-way to San Diego Bay through their property, El Rancho de la Nacion. Eager for a toehold on the Pacific, Santa Fe accepted the offer and built a station and rail yards in National City. Too quickly, they discovered the challenge of Southern California's weather and geography.
Surveyors that were hired were from the east, and they were unaware that the Santa Margarita River drains the entire Temecula Basin in a very wet year.
A flood wiped out a large section of trek before it was even finished. Engineers hastily changed their plans and rerouted the railroad into Los Angeles, a growing city of 50,000 that was easier to reach and closer to San Francisco.
This left San Diegans feeling very second-rate, feeling actually very constricted economically because the Los Angelinos actively told lies about San Diego, that the city was infested with fleas, that the whole city burned down last week.
People in Los Angeles were even saying, if you go to San Diego, take your water in a jug because there isn't any available in San Diego. And I think it was just a rivalry that they were not able to overcome.
With its railroad demoted to just a spur off the main line, San Diego watched another opportunity slip away. By 1887, the winds of change were blowing in San Diego, and they brought in an unexpected guest, John Diedrich Spreckels. The oldest son of Klaus Spreckels, founder of the Spreckels Sugar Company, John was a shrewd and well-respected businessman in his own right. At only 34 years of age, he was building his own empire, which included sugar plantations in Hawaii, shipping interests, banks, and real estate. City fathers, still searching for a path to prosperity, made a surprising offer to the young man from San Francisco.
They offered him a franchise for a wharf in the harbor, which he thought was okay, but he is no dummy. He said that he also would like a franchise for the dispensing of coal on his wharf. Remember at this time that shipping was fueled by coal. You simply cannot have the maritime industry without coal. If you have control of the coal, then you have a very powerful economic tool. It's very typical of his entire career of finding very important aspects of the infrastructure of the community and making them his.
When Spreckels first arrived in San Diego, the economic boom of the 1880s was collapsing, fueled by the departure of the railroad to Los Angeles. Spreckels immediately began buying out failing businesses, including the Hotel del Coronado, San Diego's luxury seaside resort, the trolley system, and the San Diego Union newspaper.
When he looked at San Diego, shortly after the boom of 1880, he was looking at a city of about 16,000 people, which was really a small town. It wasn't really a city. But he had the vision to see the assets of the beautiful harbor, the climate, and to see this as a potential base for the creation of a major city.
The Spreckels family empire was based in San Francisco. John's two brothers, Adolf and Rudolf, also helped to run the family businesses, alongside Father Klaus. John's wife, Lily, and 4 children completed this comfortable family circle. In all his investments, John shared equal partnership with his brother Adolf. John was the idea man, seeking out new projects and building new enterprises. A.B. worked behind the scenes, managing the family businesses. A.B. was John's closest friend and most trusted confidant. Together, they would lay the groundwork for a modern San Diego, starting with the most precious desert commodity, water.
He decides to invest in a water company, and it's a little water company called the Otay Water Company. It became the Southern California Mountain Water Company and did very well.
Then as time goes by, he expands his empire. He becomes involved in transportation very heavily. He eventually ends up owning the streetcar system. The streetcar system was primarily run by electricity, so he is a major factor in creating what becomes the San Diego Gas and Electric Company.
John Spreckels has been called by some a visionary, I don't think he saw himself that way. What John Spreckels saw was a man who recognized opportunity when it came up and hit him in the face. The city needs water. I'll start a water company. I'm not going to ask everyone else. I'm just going to go out and do it. The city needs more transportation. I'll buy up the other railroads. I'll improve them. I'll make things happen. There's no doubt in my mind that John Spreckels always felt of himself that what was good for John Spreckels was good for San Diego.
With the backing of the Spreckels brothers, San Diego was becoming more than a dusty little town at the end of a desert. Spreckels developed his properties as the center of San Diego's downtown business district. He merged two small banks into the First Trust and Savings Bank of San Diego at the corner of 5th and Broadway. He built the Union Building for his newspaper a block away on 6th Avenue. Then, in the heart of downtown, he constructed the magnificent Spreckels Theater. Patterned after a London opera house, Spreckels oversaw its construction and decor. When it was completed, it boasted the largest stage outside of New York City and was considered acoustically perfect by performers and audiences. Spreckels also left his imprint on surrounding communities. In Coronado, he created Tent City at the Hotel del Coronado, a seaside summer resort for the working class. He also built Belmont Park, a Coney Island-style amusement park at Mission Beach. In order to reach these popular destinations, the public could conveniently take John Spreckels' trolley line.
He developed a lovely park overlooking Mission Valley. It would be at the end of Park Avenue. It's called Mission Cliffs Garden, with gardens and bandstands, and was the place to go on a Sunday. And of course, to get there, you had to take Spreckels' streetcar, and that was the whole point.
He had some benevolent ideas, but they always were tied to how he could make money.
To those who criticized his motives, John Spreckels replied,
I'm a businessman, not a Santa Claus, nor a damned fool.
His investments in San Diego were thriving, but privately, John's health was failing. A digestive illness left him unable to eat. He was bedridden and close to death when in April 1906, the unthinkable occurred. The San Francisco earthquake of 1906 left Spreckels' home and businesses in ruins. Spreckels moved Lily, his younger son, 2 daughters, and their family south to San Diego to live in the Hotel del Coronado. The change seemed to breathe new life into John. He regained his health and decided to make Coronado his permanent home. He built the family home using steel-reinforced concrete to withstand the strongest earthquake. From that point on, all Spreckels buildings were constructed in this manner. In public, John Spreckels appeared stern and aloof. But in private, he was a devoted family man, with a sense of fun and good humor that his grandchildren adored. The turn of the century was an exciting time for Spreckels, for the world was finally noticing San Diego. The military chose San Diego as their Pacific port. The Panama Canal was under construction, and San Diego would be the first West Coast American port for ships passing through the canal. In the Imperial Valley, east of San Diego, agriculture was blossoming into a significant part of the regional economy. All this activity made the prospect of a rail link more feasible than ever, and Edward H. Harriman, rail tycoon and president of Southern Pacific, one of America's largest and most influential railroad companies, had his eye on the developing situation.
Southern Pacific, as early as 1902, developed an interest in Lower California, specifically San Diego. On the scene by 1902 was Edward Harriman. Harriman was nothing if he wasn't a builder, and so he looked into this possibility too, building a line east from San Diego.
Harriman went to the one man who could help him, the most powerful man in San Diego, John Spreckels.
Harriman apparently asked Spreckels to be his agent, in a sense, in doing this. Probably the reason simply is that the political climate from the 1890s, early 20th century in California was so hostile to railroads, and particularly to the Southern Pacific Railroad as the great monopoly, the octopus that strangled people large and small. So he really was a front man then to prevent it from looking like a part of the expansion of Southern Pacific.
December 14th, 1906, San Diegans woke to the incredible news. Railroad from San Diego to Yuma is now assured. Shortly after the announcement, Harriman paid a visit to Spreckels. He denied all involvement with the new railroad, but secretly, he furnished Spreckels with $3 million to get the project underway. By mid-January 1907, surveying began. As they scrutinized the tortuous terrain, it became evident this would be no ordinary job.
Building any kind of a railroad, though, from San Diego east to go over that part of the Coast Range was going to be a real challenge. And by that I mean engineering challenges, but also it was going to be costly per route mile.
In fact, there were at least 3 major surveys done, 2 on the U.S. side of the border by way of Dulsura, and of course the Mexican line. The primary reason that the Mexican route was chosen had to do with gradient.
Railroads will go many miles out of the way to avoid steep climbs and descents because it reduces the pulling power of the locomotive. This adds wear and tear to equipment and increases operating costs. The gentler gradient through Mexico would save Spreckels time and money that would be later spent building through the rugged Laguna Mountain Range east of San Diego. After surveying the route firsthand, Chief Engineer Edmund J. Callwright reported back to Spreckels of the challenges that lay ahead.
Carrizo Gorge, where the line will descend from mountain to desert, is in itself one of the most formidable places that a railroad was ever built in.
As the obstacles became known, skeptics dubbed it the Impossible Railroad. Spreckels had yet to meet a challenge he couldn't overcome. He and his engineers hoped to have the railroad finished in just a few years. Work began slowly amidst a short-lived financial panic. Southern Pacific, short on cash, asked Spreckels to front money from his own pocket to keep work going.
John Spreckels knew very well that it would take millions of dollars of 1906 money to do this job. He knew that it had to be done as quickly as possible. Time was wasting. Up in Los Angeles, a new harbor was being dredged. The Panama Canal was now well underway. His railroad needed to be ready, and that meant somebody with very, very deep pockets. John Spreckels had deep pockets for San Diego, but not on the national level that Harriman and his railroad empire could muster.
By 1909, Southern Pacific's finances had improved. Robert Scherer and Sons Company from Los Angeles was awarded the grading contracts from San Diego south to the border and into Mexico. The San Diego and Arizona Railway took delivery of its first locomotive, number 1, a 6-wheeled switch engine built in Pittsburgh, and some rolling stock. But as the tracks moved across the border into Mexico, Spreckels was about to face his first serious challenge, the death of Eh Harriman.
Things rocked along until Harriman died in 1909, and at that time, SP managers took another look at this and didn't necessarily like what they saw, and the thing was put on hold.
And as so often happens in corporate land, E.H. Harriman's will, the minute he dies, is no longer the driving force behind the Southern Pacific. The new management comes in. They don't want any part of this extension. They don't see the economic potential of it. they not only withhold the money, they file a lawsuit wanting back the $3 million they've already spent.
This was a tremendous blow for Spreckels. The issue would drag on for years. In the end, Spreckels chose to finance the railroad and go it alone.
John Spreckels did what John Spreckels had to do. He started selling assets. His water company was the first and largest object on the block. It turned out to be a good deal for San Diego. They got a water district. John Spreckels got the money to continue building his railroad.
The first heavy construction came in the rocky canyons just south of Tijuana, Mexico, where 2 trestles and 2 tunnels were needed. These required a different kind of construction. Pilings were driven deep in canyons that often raged with floodwaters. Bridges were constructed of steel. Tunnels cut through soft rock needed shoring and reinforcement. Hard rock tunnels were blasted an inch at a time. By 1910, these first major barriers were surmounted, and the railroad was ready for business. The public was introduced to the newly opened San Diego and Arizona Railway aboard an excursion train to a resort south of Tijuana called Agua Caliente.
It was a hotel, it was a casino, and its popularity was immense, with San Diego certainly, but probably its greatest impact was on Los Angeles. This was a great favorite outing for the people of the movie industry, actors, directors, producers, whatever. They would go down on the train in such large numbers over the beginning of the weekend that sometimes you couldn't get them all on the train on Sunday night to get them back home at one time.
From the first picnic train in 1910 through the end of Prohibition in 1933, the trip to Agua Caliente remained the most popular excursion on the San Diego and Arizona line. Before granting permission for the San Diego and Arizona to build through Mexico, the Mexican government placed several conditions on the agreement with Spreckels.
When he applied for this permit, he found out that he had to form a Mexican company that would be responsible. So this company was formed. It was called the Tijuana and Tecate Compañía Ferroviaria del Ferrocarril de Tijuana Tecate. They were supposed to raise capital, but there was American capital. And they were supposed to buy tracks and rails and equipment and all that. It was all American. They never actually had one caboose. They never had an engine. They never had a baggage car. Never, nada. All they owned was a rail line. And they, in turn, would lease it to the Americans who would use this line and then pay a fee to transport through Mexico their goods.
Baja California in 1910 was a vast, empty land, not yet a Mexican state. Tijuana and Tecate were hardly more than small villages. Into this wild and rugged backcountry, word of political unrest in Mexico City spread. Revolution was threatening the regime of longtime dictator Porfirio Diaz. At the same time, militant labor organizers from the Chicago-based IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, had been thwarted in their attempts to find support in San Diego. They spilled across the border to take advantage of the tenuous political situation in neighboring Mexico.
It gave some people an idea that nobody was guarding the peninsula, that they were so busy with the problem back in the center that this was free for the taking.
The renegade Americans regularly hijacked the San Diego and Arizona supply train, taking clothes, food, and tobacco bound for the crews at work on the line. Mexican laborers, fearing conscription from both sides, failed to show for work, while American workers simply refused to enter the battle zone.
These were political guerrillas, more than serious fighters. Nonetheless, they must have been very menacing to the conductors and the crews on the railroad. And John Spreckels, of course, was extremely concerned, wanting to do anything he could to speed this process up because, again, everything in the world around him is happening, and he's losing valuable time.
Spreckels moved his workers back into California and out of harm's way to continue work on the eastern end of the line.
The Mexican Revolution had an impact on the San Diego and Arizona that lasted for several months. But in fact, aside from this brief moment that construction was disrupted and you might say, investors were threatened with the possible loss of their railway, it really didn't have a great deal of effect on the property.
The American insurgents were eventually captured and extradited to San Diego. Conditions in Mexico stabilized once more, and the workers returned to face the next big construction challenge at Valle Redondo.
It's interesting that most of the attention to the geography goes to the Carrizo Gorge section, but in fact the Mexican side involved equally significant engineering in the area of Valle Redondo, where we make the most significant climb of the railway in a series of bow knots and double horseshoe curves.
So in a turn of what it would cost them to go across the valley this way and then having to go like this, they had to put a lot of more miles this way, and they had to build mounds along the way. And so that was expensive. It was rather clever, engineering-wise, how they solved the problem.
As the terrain became more challenging, Spreckels needed workers skilled in heavy construction. He contracted with the Utah Construction Company and Toohey Brothers Construction from Oregon to supply the machines and workers to carry out the complex grade and fill roadwork. Engines number 1 and 50 delivered about 200 workers daily from San Diego. They were experienced journeymen, many of them immigrants from Europe and Asia, and a small number of Mexicans. By 1914, the year the line was supposed to be finished, the railroad reached the small Mexican border town of Tecate, just 53 rail miles from San Diego. But San Diegans seemed unconcerned. The railroad was taking shape. Locomotives, passenger coaches, and baggage cars began to arrive. And Spreckels' dream looked as if it might not be impossible after all. In the meantime, he helped give the citizens of San Diego another big enterprise to anticipate. He feverishly expanded his trolley network throughout the city in expectation of the biggest event San Diego had ever hosted, the Panama, California Exposition of 1915. Spreckels was a key benefactor in shaping the event. He was both generous and self-interested. The better the exposition, the busier his properties would be. He donated the building which housed the Botanical Gardens in Balboa Park. Appropriately, its delicate wood-lath construction covers the steel frame of a railroad station. He also gave another lasting gift to the park, one that revealed his passion for the arts: the Spreckels Organ Pavilion. It was Ralph Waldo Emerson who said, "The best gift is a part of yourself." Spreckels' love of music was deeply personal, and this one-of-a-kind outdoor pipe organ became the centerpiece of the exposition. It continues to thrill audiences to this day. By the end of 1915, the San Diego and Arizona Railroad was back at the border. It had taken 6 years to complete 60 miles of railroad.
The last tunnel has actually straddled the border, and part of it exists in Baja California, part of it in the state of California, and I don't know of any other examples of an international railway tunnel between the United States and Mexico.
The tempo of work was finally gaining momentum when nature dealt the next blow.
In 1916, San Diego had the worst flood in its history, and many people attribute it directly to the machinations of Charles Hatfield. Charles Hatfield billed himself as a scientific rainmaker. He was hired by the city of San Diego to end a drought. He set up his base of operations at Lake Morena, and in January of 1916, it began to rain.
14 straight days of rain caused the Sweetwater Dam to burst, sending floodwaters rushing toward San Diego. The railroad's chief draftsman, Carl Eichenlaub, witnessed the damage.
We lost the fill in Sweetwater. We lost the fill in Otay. We lost the bridge across the Tijuana River.
The railroad was a heartbreaking wreck.
The San Diego and Arizona was up to 25% washed away by the flood. So John Spreckels is left strapped. His railroad is washed out. His crews are demoralized, waiting for a word from their commander-in-chief. What do we do now? John Spreckels says, put it back.
Months behind schedule, the tracks reached the American border town of Campo. Then, the Upper Campo Creek Viaduct, a spectacular 580-foot bridge and the largest man-made structure on the line. Next, they reached the Tecate Divide Summit, the highest elevation on the line at over 3,600 feet and 82 rail miles from San Diego. The men called it High Pass. Finally, in December of 1916, the 7-year lawsuit with Southern Pacific was settled. SP would keep its interest in the San Diego and Arizona Railway and resume financing its construction. The agreement came just in time, for the most difficult stretch of the road still lay ahead.
Carrizo Gorge is a hell on earth kind of a place to have to build a railroad. It's 114 to 120 degrees in the shade. It's very, very hard rock in most places. Everything has thorns on it. There's not a level spot to be found.
It's really just an extraordinarily hostile environment, and it's easy to see why the constructing of a railroad there would have been one of the most challenging in the world.
The final contract, covering the last 20 miles, was signed with the Utah Construction Company, including the impossible stretch through the Carrizo Gorge. It was 1917, the same year America entered World War I. The government ceased operation of the railroads, and all new construction was halted. After years of work and worry, a desperate Spreckels traveled to the nation's capital. He convinced authorities it was necessary to finish the railroad. He argued his railroad provided vital access to San Diego's military installations, Fort Rosecrans, Camp Kearny, North Island, as well as the Pacific Fleet. He was granted an exemption, the only one given, and work continued. Expensive bypass roads had to be built along the walls of the canyon to haul equipment and supplies into work sites. Steam-powered equipment performed excavating and grading, but still, the work of men was most critical and least available. Isabel Ferguson, whose father worked in the gorge, witnessed firsthand the inhospitable working conditions.
There is nothing but rock formations of every conceivable size, shape, and kind line the sides of this 1,000-foot deep canyon. The men scale huge boulders and sheer rock walls. Many times this can only be accomplished by rope.
Working in the Carrizo Gorge was fraught with peril. You lived in a tent camp perched on a ledge. You had to slide everything up and down ramps and haul everything up and down with ropes. It was back-breaking, grueling labor. 11 miles you had to look forward to under those kind of conditions.
They named their camps Arsenic Spring, Camp Sizzle, and Gas, Puff, Groan, Moan, and Grunt Mountain. The men had to hike to the bottom of the gorge to reach the only water for drinking and bathing. The stream, which ran year-round in this desert canyon, was tepid and sour tasting. Jobs ranged from the most skilled engineering positions to back-breaking manual labor. The pay was generous, $3 a day, plus room and board. Still, most didn't last more than a few weeks.
The entire railroad has to be carved out of the canyon, literally carved, with whatever tools are at hand, with picks and shovels and black powder. The only real technology available to them was the locomotive, the steam shovel. Everything else was grunt work. It was sweat and toil, pick and shovel and pry bar, inch by inch, carving that railroad out of the rock.
Chief Draftsman Carl Eichenlaub lived the daily struggle with nature.
You can step from one boulder to another all the way up and down the gorge. Sometimes boulders roll off the slopes, driving the track into the roadbed, 6, 8, 10 feet. These mountains, they are a heartbreaker.
Nobody anticipated how difficult it was going to be to find and keep laborers there, the engineering challenges. It was just one of those things where, the best laid plans is mice and men. In this particular case, the Carrizo Gorge was bigger than the men making the plans.
Engineers feared the extreme heat of this desert canyon, which often reached 120 degrees. They chose the most durable material they could find, heart redwood, to build the trestle bridges and shore up tunnels. Slowly, the road was carved out of the steep slopes of the canyon. The workers built 17 tunnels and 13 trestle bridges in these exhausting conditions. Somehow, just 2 men lost their lives in construction accidents on the San Diego and Arizona Railway. But another killer would stalk the crews. In 1919, the worldwide influenza epidemic reached remote Carrizo Gorge.
More people were killed on this railroad project by influenza than anything else. These trained crewmen were so weakened by the experience that some of them took up to a year to recover from it.
Almost half the workforce became ill. Of those, more than 1 in 10 died. Unable to find Americans willing to work in the gorge, Spreckels brought in Mexicans to finish the construction job. Foreman reported the men would leave at the slightest provocation, defecting for less dangerous work in the fields of the Imperial Valley or the docks of San Diego. Chief Engineer E.J. Callwright, concerned about labor shortages, wrote to Spreckels.
I am doing all in my power to advance the work as much as possible, but there's a limit to human endurance, and we find it in Carrizo Gorge.
As the steel ribbon climbed, so did the cost. The railroad, which began construction in 1907, was years behind schedule and running far over budget. The 11 miles through Carrizo Gorge alone had cost millions.
John Spreckels must have had an inkling, perhaps as early as the Southern Pacific difficulties, that this was not going to be a paying proposition for him. Every day that he lost time, Los Angeles in particular consolidated their hold on the shipping industry. John saw all that slipping away.
Tunnel 8 in the gorge was the last major challenge. It defied the efforts of Spreckels' best engineers. The rock walls were so hard, the workers measured their daily progress by the inch. It took 2 years to dig the 2,500-foot tunnel. Finally, in the fall of 1919, it too was conquered. The completion of the road was at hand.
John Spreckels had to take a lot of pride in the fact that he was able to do what no one had thought he would ever be able to do. A lot of people called the San Diego and Arizona the impossible railroad. John Spreckels had proved them wrong.
On the morning of November 15th, 1919, after 13 years of heartbreaking setbacks, the Gold Spike Limited rolled into Carrizo Gorge. Thousands rode the celebration train to see the remarkable road themselves and to witness John Spreckels' triumph. At the ceremony, John Spreckels dedicated the railroad to the people of San Diego.
If we could see all the obstacles we had to surmount before we reached the completion of the enterprise, then surely there would be many undertakings that would never be begun. But the road is built to fulfill the purpose for which it was built, the upbuilding of San Diego. The completion of that purpose lies in the hands of the men and women here today.
He had to be very proud of the accomplishment because the people of San Diego were so proud of the accomplishment. Something 60 years in the making had finally come to pass. San Diego is on the map.
The 66-year-old Spreckels stripped off his coat and raised the hammer high to drive the traditional gold spike. His first two swings missed. The third found its target. It was, Spreckels said, the happiest day of his life.
The San Diego and Arizona Railroad cost $18 million in the end to build, and it only goes about 140 miles. In terms of today's dollars, multiplying everything by a factor of as much as 20, you start getting a feel for the hundreds of millions of dollars that it cost to build that railroad.
The San Diego and Arizona Railway had been expensive to build. It would also prove expensive to maintain and operate. And by 1920, there was competition.
The automobile is a major part of the life of San Diego at the time that the San Diego and Arizona Railroad comes into being. The first car was registered in 1903. By 1923, there are 30,000 automobiles in a city with a population of 75,000.
By this time, it's already turned into a suburban village. At the turn of the century, when other people were still probably thinking, I'll take the train, San Diego was saying, I'll take my car.
2 passenger trains departed from San Diego daily. The majority of riders commuted locally. Few headed for the eastbound connection at Yuma. The night train hauled freight, mainly citrus, fruit, hay, and alfalfa from local farms, and some gravel and stone. A gypsum mine near the desert town of Sealy was also a regular customer. 50 carloads of freight was considered the break-even point. The San Diego and Arizona averaged just 11 carloads per day. Steam engines were fueled by oil rather than coal, since oil was locally available. Thirsty locomotives required a source for water about every 30 miles. This hot, steep desert line punished machines and men alike. Crews fit the company's initials SD and A into a more suitable name: slow, dirty, and aggravating. The rugged and scenic line attracted Hollywood's attention and created a brief boom of movie making in the Carrizo Gorge. The Beggars of Life starred Wallace Beery and Louise Brooks, and Engine Number 104. All stunts were done on location with SD&A rolling stock. Elmer Hall, the engineer who ran Number 104 on this assignment, said at times things became a little too realistic. Wreckage from this stunt remains in the gorge to this day. For all the attention it received, the railroad was never a financial success.
As I look back on Spreckels' San Diego enterprises, I really regard the San Diego and Arizona Railroad as the one really large failure in the Spreckels enterprises. I think it's the one thing that kind of got away from him.
The strain of building the railroad had taken its toll on John Spreckels. In 1922, at age 69, he retired, handing over his streetcar and ferry business to his only surviving son, Klaus. In 1924, John's beloved brother, Adolf, passed away, followed 2 years later by his wife, Lily. That same year, 1926, San Diego's great railroad builder also died. All San Diego mourned the loss of this extraordinary man. He was 72 years old. Spreckels' holdings were slowly liquidated after his death. Everything except his beloved railroad. But the San Diego and Arizona continued to be a financial drain on the Spreckels family. Maintenance and repairs often kept the line inoperable for months at a time. The track through Carrizo Gorge was especially vulnerable. Tunnels caved in. Rock slides damaged the tracks. One particularly troublesome stretch forced engineers to redesign the route in 1932 to straddle a portion of the gorge, creating one of the most spectacular features on the line, the Goat Canyon Trestle. 633 feet long and 185 feet from the ground. It's one of the largest railroad trestles in North America. The upkeep was more than Spreckels' heirs had bargained for. They sold out to Southern Pacific in 1933 for 9 cents on the dollar, and the San Diego and Arizona Railway passed into history. Resurrected later that same year as the San Diego and Arizona Eastern Railroad, Southern Pacific promoted the trip through Carrizo Gorge as a scenic ride second to none.
One New York writer wrote, "This is one of the 7 wonders of America." And when service started here very shortly after the line was opened, a great advertising and a through sleeping car on the number 1 train from Chicago. That didn't last very long. By 1940, there was a sleeping car from Chicago, but it was a tourist car, kind of a second-class car, on the number 2 train.
The price for all this exquisite scenery? Costly, ongoing maintenance.
In terms of maintenance cost, you have the up and down nature of the railroad. Lifting heavy tonnage over these grades, very, very expensive. The curvature, the laws of physics kick in against you, lots of trestle work, the maintenance of the tunnels, in the aggregate, an operating nightmare.
The thing about railroading around here was that it was mountain work, a lot of curves, a lot of things going out of sight, and in the gorge you couldn't see the rear end of the train in many instances. But it was dangerous work.
What was dangerous for the crew was downright irritating for passengers.
As we were approaching the gorge, it was very, very hot. Everybody had their windows open on the coaches. They came through the train, says, "Everybody close your windows. We're coming to Carrizo Gorge, there's tunnels." Well, nobody wants to close their windows. It was so blazing hot. But let me tell you, when we hit Tunnel 21, everybody was fighting to get those windows closed because the smoke and gas was coming in that train. And some of those, and the trains was squealing on those sharp curves, and some of the people were looking on the canyon side, were looking down. They got up and moved over to the other side of the train. Not that that was going to help them any, but they did.
When World War II broke out in 1941, rapid expansion of aircraft manufacturing and increased activity at naval installations in San Diego brought a surge of traffic to the railroad.
The reason this railroad was so important during the war years, it was a direct line from the east to San Diego. There were many, many troop trains, many military trains with military equipment, and of course there were passenger trains also.
Many times I would get on and it was very, very crowded. To have a seat on a train during those years, There's no such thing. Forget about your reservation. It didn't mean a thing.
At the close of the war, business dropped off dramatically. By 1951, passenger service from San Diego to points east had ended.
The work could have been there. This railroad could have been a good railroad. And they could have upgraded it back in those days, but they just never did.
Big modern steam engines never found their way into Carrizo Gorge because of the tight curves and weight limitations over timber trestles. Instead, double-headed steam would pull heavier trains over the most challenging grades, adding to the operating costs. The switch from steam to diesel power in the early 1950s was an operating improvement for a railroad with heavy grades and desert water conditions. But by the 1960s, the railroad industry as a whole was in a steep decline. For the San Diego and Arizona Eastern, maintenance costs were still high. Southern Pacific's traffic base was eroding. The east-west interstate from San Diego to Yuma was completed in 1970. With this fast highway, trucking became a formidable competitor. Still, it took another act of nature to bring the railroad to its knees.
Now comes Hurricane Kathleen, 1975. Terrible damage to the railroad. SP was in a really tight spot. Here he was a loser, but here's an important line segment in the state of California, your home state, a terrible public relations nightmare if you tried to abandon. On the other hand, there was no possible way you could justify going back and rebuilding this railroad.
Southern Pacific repaired the line by order of the federal government, then quietly sold the railroad to the city of San Diego. 8 years later, a fire in Tunnel 8, the longest and most difficult to build, burned for days, closing the railroad through the Carrizo Gorge for good. Today, excursion trains operate at Campo, recreating the old San Diego and Arizona Railway for curious tourists and rail fans. Freight still moves on the line, serving the gypsum industry in the Imperial Valley and climbing the grade at Valle Redondo, bringing raw materials from the U.S. to the brewery at Tecate. A light rail trolley runs on the tracks John Spreckels laid in the city over 100 years ago. And the Carrizo Gorge is still as beautiful and rugged and remote as ever.
I think it's a terrific tourist destination. It's incredible country that there's no other way to see it. This is one place they're not going to build a highway through.
San Diego and Arizona Railroad has left its mark. It was the last transcontinental railroad link completed. It demonstrated something about the American people and about American industry, conquering the obstacles that it encountered.
I think probably the greatest impact that the San Diego and Arizona Railroad could have may lie in the future rather than in the present or the past. I think with the increased trade between the United States and Mexico, that its role in moving goods could it become large in a way that it never did in the past.
I know that there are many, many people would love to go through Carrizo Gorge. It would certainly be a great thing if Tunnel 8 and Tunnel 16 could be opened up so that could be possible.
I think it would be wonderful if they could ever get it open again, all the way. It would be wonderful. It's a great loss. A great loss.
The possibility of reopening the line to modern rail travel has been raised several times. But like its beginning, nothing is assured. Yet it continues to survive, in spite of the forces of nature and the passage of time. The San Diego and Arizona lives on, a monument to the energy and determination of the last great railroad builder, John D. Spreckels. From his courage came a magnificent creation of human ingenuity and imagination. A railroad made from wood and steel and indomitable human spirit. The Impossible Railroad. Its final chapter is yet to be written.
To order a VHS cassette of The Impossible Railroad, call 1-800-266-5727. The price is $24.95 plus applicable sales tax. Include $3 for shipping. Credit cards are accepted.